Magnets. What are they? How do they work? Are they really permanent? Well, here at Dr. Jain's Advanced Functional Materials Research Group at the University of Connecticut, we know the answers to these questions, and we'll attempt to explain them in this video. Now, you may remember from your high school physics class that moving electrons cause magnetic fields, and maybe there's something in there about a right-hand rule. But the important thing is that if you get electrons moving in a circle, like by winding a wire into a coil, then in the center of the coil, the magnetic field can add together, creating an electromagnet type that's used to pick up cars and image your brain. But how, you ask, does that work in the case of permanent magnets? Well, for that, we'll have to consider a individual atom. And for our purposes, we're going to use the example of iron. Now, you may remember from your high school chemistry class this time that electrons fill in different energy levels, and they fill in this particular pattern due to the Pauli exclusion principle. And you may remember that these energy levels are called orbitals. You have to have seen this picture where electrons are flying around the nucleus of the atom, and you might think to yourself, that looks exactly like electrons going in a circle creating magnetism. But I'm going to stop you right there, because electrons are not actually little particles flying around the nucleus. In fact, it's best not to think of them as particles at all, but instead waves. The explanation for that would require a completely separate video. But suffice to say that electrons aren't actually orbiting the nucleus, but they do have the quantum mechanical version of angular momentum. And that's what gives the orbitals the shapes of the S, P, and D orbitals. Now, these still have angular momentum, so they still should cause magnetism. So when you go into your calculations and you figure out for each atom of iron how much the orbitals should, how much magnetism that should come from each iron atom from the orbitals, then you find out you can get a number. It's 0.08 for magneton. Then when you go in the lab and you very carefully measure a lump of iron and divide by the number of atoms in that lump, you get 2.2 for magneton per iron atom. 2.2, you ask, what went wrong? Why are they so different? Well, one word: spin. Now, if you have a ball that has charge on it, and you spin that ball around its axis, the charges on the surface of the ball will be moving in a circle, creating magnetic fields. But just like electrons don't actually spin, they do have the quantum mechanical version of spin, which can only have two values, up and down. And that's what those arrows were when we were filling up the electronic configuration of iron. Now, if you go back to your calculation and you run it just considering the unpaired spins in the electronic configuration, and you figure out how much magnetic moment that should contribute to, you find you get 2.25, and that's a lot closer to the 2.2 we've actually measured. So now we know where the magnetic moment comes from for each iron atom. Now we need to consider how these iron atoms fit together. Iron forms in a crystal structure known as body-centered cubic, with 4 atoms at each corner and 1 atom in the center. And the magnetic moments of these iron atoms are all aligned together in what is known as ferromagnetism. And this basic unit cell repeats and repeats and repeats to fill space. And at this point, we're ready to consider a full bar of iron. And we'll first think about it as the iron is really, really hot. When it's so hot, the atoms are jumbling around so much that none of the moments on each of these irons can co-align. So they're jumbling around. Then when we begin to cool the bar of iron, we see that some of the atoms can pick a particular direction, and the atoms around those will align in the same direction. But the atoms in this region of the bar of iron are very, very far away from this region of the bar of iron. Too far away to interact, so far that they didn't get the memo which direction to align. So you end up with these different regions all aligned in different directions called domains. And now you can apply a magnetic field like from the electronic electromagnets we discussed at the very beginning of the video. And when you do that, you can rotate these magnetic moments to give you the north end in red and the south end in blue. And now, since these magnetic domains all wanted to align together in the first place, and there's no force requiring them to turn back, they stay in that same orientation, giving you a permanent magnet. And this is how permanent magnets work.
As with credits, our editor and animations was the undergrad in the lab Lucas Kuna. The show was written and narrated by me, Austin Danold. Our advisor is Dr. Jain, and special thanks to the National Science Foundation for funding our work.